What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Perhaps. Good to be here. And today will be a pretty serious episode. I'm going to talk a bit about some of the recent legislation that's been used against trans people, some of Trump's anti-trans rhetoric, and some of my thoughts on it all and where we go from here. Thank you for being here. Appreciate you all. Last week, let's do a quick check-in before we get into some of that. Last week was episode 33. Talking about turning 33. Wanted to make sure you all knew 33 is cool. Now that I'm on the other side of it, had a small little get together with some friends, having a good time. And I wrote a Substack article a bit about turning 33. But I also talked about this fear of falling behind in life and how we feel that multiple times at different ages throughout our lives. And I called the article, "Don't Let the Fear of Falling Behind Steal Your Life." And it's a really good one. So go check that out. Follow me on there if you're not already. My newsletter on damongarcia.substack.com. And wanted to make sure y'all knew I got a book coming out in June 23rd. And so I've been posting a lot more. We're back on this podcast every week. I've been posting a lot more on Instagram, YouTube Shorts, on my main channel, Damon Garcia, and the TikTok. I'm back on TikTok. My account got restricted and like they locked me out and I couldn't even get in there or something. I don't know what happened. So I made a new TikTok, but yeah, I'm just posting the same video on each of those things, little short videos every day. And yeah, I'm just trying to get out there again and put myself out there, put some good messages out there in the world. And it's feeling good. It's feeling good being back and posting stuff and talking to y'all and hearing from y'all. Appreciate it. And so go follow me on those if you haven't already. And now that we got that out of the way, because this is my podcast, people, we gotta make sure we put everything in here. We got time. It's a podcast, as the first episode of this whole thing started out with. Now, people, trans people in Kansas, there's news today, are being forced to surrender their driver's licenses and IDs because their licenses are being considered invalid. And if they don't get a new license that reflects their, quote, sex at birth, then they could face up to 6 months in jail or a $1,000 fine. And I was reading all about this from this article. I'll link it in the description. But if you don't see that, just go to aaroninthemorning.com. Also a Substack page from Erin Reed. And she posts a lot of really good articles on updating us on all the recent anti-trans legislation that's been going on. And so it's a really good resource, her page. And so today she posted an article called "Kansas Sends Letters to Trans People Demanding the Immediate Surrender of Driver's Licenses." And she got a letter that was sent out to people in Kansas. And let me read just a bit of this letter. "Dear Kansas credential holder," it's dated February 23rd, 2026. "House substitute for Senate Bill 244, enacted by the Kansas legislature overriding Governor Kelly's veto, requires Kansas-issued driver's licenses and identification cards to reflect the credential holder's sex at birth and directs the Division of Vehicles to comply with KSA 77207. What does this mean for you if you've received this notice?" And then telling them they got to turn in their license. And it's interesting. This part. "Pursuant to this new law, if the gender/sex identification indication on the face of your current credential does not match your sex assigned at birth, you're directed to surrender your current credential to the Kansas Division of Vehicles." Now, here's what's interesting about as I'm reading this, all these signals are going off in my head of like all the times I've heard libertarians yap about government overreach. And unfortunately, a lot of libertarians are also socially conservative, and with that tends to come a very anti-trans politic. But let me tell y'all, if you support this and you're a libertarian, you have no right to call yourself a libertarian anymore. If you want to talk about, oh my God, Big Brother surveillance state, big government, big brother. 1984. If you want to talk about that and not blatantly see how that's all in this letter, you gotta check your heart, yo. You gotta really think, am I really libertarian? I've never identified as a libertarian. I definitely resonate with anti-big government, particularly a big capitalist government. And then I read stuff like this and I'm like, yeah, let's go. Let's go, libertarians. I'm ready. If there's a libertarian revolution that will fight this, I'm down to fight with them. But unfortunately, a lot of them are hypocrites. Same with the ICE raids that's been happening over the last year. You have a lot of people call themselves libertarian but support that. And the growing surveillance state that is being funded by the Department of Homeland Security, all with the narrative that we're protecting you from these terrorists, which is just what they're calling immigrants. And it is one of those times where you really wish people were actually consistent, you know? And so, yeah, you could read that full article for more context, but let me read one more paragraph from the article about the Senate Bill 244, also known as the Bathroom Bounty Bill. And so this new thing, forcing trans people to surrender their driver's licenses, falls under the same Senate bill. So the Bathroom Bounty Bill contained heavy identification documents as well. The bill was rushed through the Kansas legislature in January using a gut-and-go procedure that bypassed nearly all public input on its key provisions. Governor Laura Kelly vetoed the bill on February 13th, calling it poorly drafted, but the legislature overrode her veto days later. In addition to the driver's license provisions, the law bans transgender people from using bathrooms matching their gender identity in public buildings and creates a bathroom bounty hunter system, allowing citizens to sue transgender people they encounter in restrooms for at least $1,000 in damages, including potentially in private restrooms. The bill takes effect immediately upon publication in the Kansas Register rather than the standard July 1st effective date, giving transgender Kansans just days between the override and the invalidation of their identity documents. Oh yeah, that's another thing in that letter. It said no grace period. So today, if they're driving around with the driver's license they've had, they can get in legal trouble. And so again, do you want to talk about 1984? Oh my goodness. And then it also reminds me of the classic poem of like, first they came for the socialists, but I did nothing because I wasn't a socialist. Then they came for them, and then they came for them, and then they came, and last of all, they came for me. But nobody was there for me. By that point, people have to open their eyes and see this is the pattern. They're building a stronger authoritarian surveillance state that's going to oppress all of us. And they're able to build it by first demonizing trans people and immigrants and put it all through law and get a lot of citizens' support putting it into law, because they've been brainwashed to think that they're being protected from trans people and immigrants. This is how it happens, people. It's dystopian, straight up. And then I also wanted to mention there's news about Gavin Newsom. That old California governor. I'm in California, by the way. Yeah, I'm used to, the Gavin Newscum signs. Definitely not a Gavin Newsom fan, but not for the same reasons as the Republicans who are always calling him Gavin Newscum. I think Gavin Newsom is basically a Republican. He's way too moderate, way too much of just an establishment Democrat. And he's proving himself to be so, as he's talking about all sorts of different political positions because he's gearing up to run for president. And it's not official yet, but it's like, of course, it's all leaning toward that. But it seems like the strategy he's going for is seeing all the people that voted for Trump and deciding to just be more Republican. But the problem with that strategy is the people who want a Republican in office are just going to vote for the Republican, not the Republican light. You know what I mean? So he did an interview with CNN and he said, quote, "The Democratic Party needs to be, dare I say, more culturally normal and less prone to spending disproportionate amount of time on pronouns, identity politics, more focused on tabletop issues, things that really matter, that are stacking the stress in terms of electricity bills and childcare costs and healthcare and obviously housing costs." And then he said he's even fallen prey to that himself because he was out front on marriage equality. So saying like, like blaming himself, like, oh yeah, I lost the plot too when I was too focused on pronouns and identity politics when we legalized gay marriage. And he's saying like now the Democratic Party needs to stop focusing on that so much. Now here's the problem. It's a clear appeal to Republicans. And again, if you're trying to appeal to Republicans who have a problem with trans people, they're going to prefer the Republican candidate that just says, let's get rid of trans people over the Democrat who's trying to appeal to them by saying, let's just stop talking so much about trans people. You see how this doesn't work at all? This appeal? You see how unappealing it actually is? Like, it's not appealing to anybody, except for other moderate Democrats who want to hop on board just to win. If it seems like that's what's going to get them to win, then okay, cool, let's go with that. Ezra Klein, similar podcaster, journalist dude. If you don't know, Democrat guy, has put out quite a bit of things that have a similar message of trying to appeal more to moderates and Republicans, and has made point after point after point of how important it is to win and to do what you can to win. And so it's just those people who think like, oh, this could be potentially a good strategy to appeal to people we disagree with. But the thing is, the people that it needs to appeal to is the people you disagree with, and it's not appealing to them. So it's just pointless. And here's the other problem with the whole thing of like, the Democrat Party needs to be more culturally normal and stop talking so much, spend disproportionate amount of time on pronouns and identity politics. Here's the other problem. They don't talk about pronouns and identity politics. Like he's talking about Democrat politicians and candidates, not random liberal and lefty Twitter users, not people on the internet, not activists on the internet. He's talking about Democrat politicians who don't talk about that. That's like part of the problem. And it's always just been false propaganda stirred up by Republican politicians and candidates to say that Democrats are obsessed with trans people, always talking about trans, always talking about pronouns, all these genders. They never were talking about it because they're trying to win elections and they're trying to avoid sounding too alienating. And so they've always intentionally avoided talking about pronouns and identity politics. Like, you really think Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Hillary Clinton, Pete Buttigieg, Andrew Yang, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, who else was, I'm trying to remember all the Democrat presidential candidates. Do you think all those people have been talking too much about pronouns and identity politics? No. It was just the Republican candidates saying that Democrats can't stop talking about it. But the only ones who couldn't stop talking about it were Republicans. That's why Tim Walz's whole thing about calling Republicans weird worked so well, because there were a lot of people that were tired of hearing about trans people from Republicans all the time. And it clicked with so many people because people did think it was weird that Republicans kept talking about them. But these Democrat candidates weren't. So all it is just affirming a right-wing propaganda lie by saying, yes, you're right, us Democrat politicians do talk too much about pronouns and identity politics, and we got to stop. Again, just an appeal to right-wingers, just saying, oh yeah, that lie that they made about Democrats, yeah, that's true, we got to stop that. And here's the other thing. Deciding to talk even less about trans people than they already are won't get rid of the right-wing caricature of Democrats always talking about trans people. It will just allow them to keep lying and keep filling in the blanks. That's the thing. If it wasn't based on anything they were actually saying to begin with, then they could just keep saying it. And the strategy usually is just to point to random internet users or random activists that don't have any power in government and pointing to them and saying, this is what the Democratic Party is all about. And it's really people that have nothing to do with the Democrat Party. It's exhausting. And we need to talk about trans rights. It is an issue. There are real anti-trans legislations that are affecting American citizens. So saying like, oh yeah, we need to be more culturally normal and ignore all of it is so ridiculous. And we're facing an army of right-wing influencers who are actively convincing people that trans people are extremely violent and that there's a big trans mass shooter problem right now. I talked a bit about this in a short video I posted the other day, but a couple weeks ago, there was a high school hockey game and someone in Rhode Island, and someone came and shot their wife and kids and then shot themselves dead. And then there was a debate over whether they're trans or not. Because this person sometimes dressed as a woman, but there's also conflicting reports, and their Twitter account also revealed them to be a far right-winger, a Nick Fuentes fan. And so there's confusion there. Also, people were saying there was a history of mental illness and abuse in the family. And before there was any solid information, a bunch of far right-wing influencers started immediately using the story to push the narrative that this is another example of an epidemic of trans violence. The big thing people don't realize about this whole trans mass shooter problem narrative, completely false narrative. Well, before I say anything, I was going to say one thing they don't realize is that it's not real. Not at all. And secondly, the other thing they don't realize is that it was always just a lie stirred up by right-wing propagandists to distract people from the real problem of a racist mass shooter problem. And I saw all of this develop being online and paying attention to internet politics over the years. I saw how some of these right-wing media guys were starting to get really annoyed because every time there was a mass shooting, they would get blamed. And then they got especially annoyed when some of these shooters started citing these guys as influences in their super racist manifestos. They would say things like that they're influenced by people like Ben Shapiro, Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, Tim Pool, Matt Walsh. And then, of course, the whole cycle would be, oh my God, see, these guys got to calm down. You guys are influencing these people to go shoot people. And they would say that they learned about the problem of racial minorities, either racial minorities being really dangerous, a threat to us, or racial minorities replacing white people. They learned that from these right-wing guys, and they're going to go do something about it. And so people would say, okay, look, you guys got to tone down your rhetoric. Look what you're causing. And then they would say, look, we have nothing to do with that. We can't control that. That has nothing to do with us. That person was just crazy or whatever. And then they would move on and just go back to what they were saying before. And then the Uvalde shooting happened. And early on in that reporting, there was a rumor that the shooter was trans. That ended up being disproven later. But these right-wing guys who are always blamed for mass shootings use that to stir up this narrative that, see, it's a trans person. And some of these guys used it as a method to troll all their critics. Trying to say, oh, so when a right-winger shoots someone, you blame the right-wing media guys. Well, guess what? A trans person is a mass shooter now. So all trans people are like this. They're all violent. But really, it was just a jab at their critics who made a similar move. Then, this narrative caught on so well that it went from a troll to a serious talking point very quickly. Because they realized they could get a lot of people worked up over this. And then it was disproven. They weren't trans, actually, the Uvalde shooter. And to this day, some people still think that they were. And they totally lost. They totally didn't get the information because of how big of a firestorm they caused by saying that they were trans. And so all this anti-trans stuff, and also, of course, let me be clear, there already was anti-trans rhetoric from these right-wing guys, but they're able to stir it up even more by also saying that they're mass shooters and the ideology and or the hormones they're taking is making them violent. And so we have to, as Michael Knowles put it, eradicate transgenderism to stop this violence. And it caught on with all their transphobic fans who just wanted another reason to justify their transphobia. And so it added more views, more money, more views, more money, more views, more money, which is really what a lot of the anti-trans rhetoric among these guys is about. In 2018, the conservative trans influencer Blair White revealed in this video, she was talking about how she didn't really want to be a part of the conservative political online movement anymore. And I think, I don't pay attention to her stuff, but I'm pretty sure she went back on that later and then just stayed a part of that movement. But I think maybe she was just like trying to separate herself from certain right-wing influencers. But she was kind of just venting about her experience in these spaces. And she said that she went on this popular right-wing influencer show and people were able to realize later that she was talking about Steven Crowder. And she said Steven Crowder told her off camera that he doesn't feel negatively about trans people. And he told her they talk negatively about trans people on the show because that's what the fans want. And it's like he just wanted her to know, like, hey, we're cool. Don't worry. I don't hate you. We just talk negatively about trans people because it's what the fans want. And then she said she met several other right-wing creators that told her the same thing. That's just how it works. A lot of these guys are just failed comedians, failed Hollywood actors, failed screenwriters. I'm talking Ben Shapiro, Michael Knowles, Candace Owens, Brett Cooper, Steven Crowder, a bunch of these guys that tried to do something creative and then failed and then just started doing a political show and got to be an entertainer. And that's what it is. It's entertainment. And the way they keep getting clicks, keep getting views, and keep getting sponsors and keep getting money is by stirring up people's emotions. And if that's your goal, to just keep getting more of an audience, keep getting more money, then you end up just doing stuff like this. It's like, oh, people love when we fearmonger about trans people, so I guess that's what we're gonna do. That's the pattern we've seen again and again. And then they'll tell you, no, that they're anti-establishment, they're censored, but they're not. People don't realize that independent media can be just as manipulative and toxic as mainstream media, because both are chasing views and money. So a lot of people have been duped, fooled, brainwashed, manipulated. And so the reality is we just need to think more practically. Like when it comes to a story about a shooter who might be trans, it doesn't matter if they're trans or not. And sure, yes, some trans individuals might commit violent acts, but it's not because they're trans. It's because of other things in their life, because there's so much other things in their life, because they're normal. And that's people don't realize that's been the pro-trans argument all along. They're just like the rest of us. Just let them live. Leave them alone. Let them be in public spaces. Let them have the same rights as everyone else and be treated with the same respect as everyone else. And the reality is, yeah, some trans people, trans individuals, might also be violent, might also be racist, might also have really messed up views in this other area of their life. Just like every other human. That's all. It's like so, it can be so simple. And Trump and his anti-trans rhetoric lately, over the last couple of years, has been talking about referring to this phrase he keeps saying, transgender for everyone. It's like a talking point branded term, transgender for everyone. He repeats it over and over in all these different speeches and interviews, saying what he's fighting against is transgender for everyone, as if it's an actual movement or organization he's referring to. Transgender for everyone. It's all very strategic to make people believe that we're doing all this legislation because we're fighting against this movement that is trying to make everyone transgender. And there's a lot of people who believe him that this is actually a thing. It's not a thing. All the people who are pro-trans rights are just that. They're not trying to make people who aren't trans become trans by force. Like that was never a thing. It's all propaganda. It's all brainwashing. Partly to continue to build this authoritarian surveillance state. Also to distract you from, to get you to keep blaming marginalized people, to distract you from the rich, powerful capitalists and the politicians they fund. And realize that they're actually the source of a lot of the problems we're all facing. Just keep looking at each other. Just keep blaming other powerless people. It's all strategy. there isn't a trans agenda. There's definitely an anti-trans agenda, though, for sure. I think there's a lot of people that just want to move on. There's a lot of us that are just like, people are trans, just let them be. Just let them be, leave them alone. Can't we all just get along, as I say? Why can't we all just be friends? Why can't we just stop making such a big fuss about this? Leave people alone. Be really libertarian, people, please. And people don't realize that the issues that some of these anti-trans politicians and voters, the issues that some of them make a really big deal about, like trans people in bathrooms or locker rooms or in sports, or what age is appropriate to let people medically transition. Those are conversations we can all have. But the problem is we can't have those conversations because they have to start with the acknowledgement that trans people actually exist. And often we can't even start there. And so the conversation can't even be had. It's like they either want to deny that trans people exist or force them to live as the gender that they know they're not. Or, as we're seeing today, criminalize them. And so it's like, we could have a conversation of, okay, can a trans woman play in women's sports? How would that work? What would we change or not change to allow that to happen? But if the other side is saying, well, no, a trans woman can't be in women's sports because they're not even trans, they're not even a woman, and they should just be in men's sports. It's like, okay, we can't even have a rational conversation about like what we would, if that would be a thing, what we could adjust or not adjust, if we would actually do it or not, because you can't even begin the conversation with acknowledging their existence. Or same with teenagers who want to medically transition. If the other side is saying, no, they can't because they're not even really trans and it's just a phase or whatever, then it's like, oh, okay, we can't even talk about if there should or shouldn't be an age because you can't even acknowledge it to start the conversation. It just goes nowhere. And about a year ago, I had a friend tell me about this issue at a local high school where there was a trans girl in a girl's locker room at the high school. And this girl went and complained about her and said to the school administration that this trans girl was looking at her in the locker room and making her really uncomfortable. But it's like intertwined with this idea of, quote, men shouldn't be in women's locker rooms. They're not really trans. They're just there to look at girls. And so it's all intermixed with that. And then people having to have a conversation. Are they trans or not? And because that becomes the conversation, they can't even have a conversation of, is there a girl in the locker room looking at other girls and making them uncomfortable? Like, you can't even get to that part. And that's what I told my friend. Like, they're asking my thoughts, and I was like, I want to get to a place, a society where if there's an issue there, it would just be about the action itself. It would just be, okay, it would just be like any other girl. If there's a girl making a girl, or in a boy's locker room, if there's a boy making a boy uncomfortable in the locker room while they're getting dressed, that would be, a thing you bring up to the administration and talk about it. But you can't even get there because it becomes, are they trans or not? They shouldn't be in there. They don't exist. It's all fake. It's this is This is what I'm trying to say. There's certain anti-trans people that try to say like that pro-trans people just shut down conversation and we just try to cancel everybody and say, how dare you? You're a transphobe. But in reality, people want to have conversations, but they can't even get the conversation started because you refuse to acknowledge they even exist. That's the reality. And as a Christian, I'm so tired of transphobia, anti-trans violence, anti-trans legislation, all being justified with Christianity, with the Bible, with God. Let me tell you, Christianity can be so much bigger, more powerful, and more beautiful, and more life-giving, and more healthy, and most importantly, more Christ-like if we stop demonizing and excluding trans people. If we included them, which is the lowest bar standard, included them, and also fully embraced them as they are, fully affirmed trans people, and above that, even allowed trans people to lead us as we all try to be more like Christ. I know some of you that may seem like just complete fantasy, but there are trans priests, trans pastors, trans clergy, trans preachers, teachers, people who are leading in church. That's a thing. I've seen it. I've been part of it before. Definitely those churches aren't as popular as the big conservative evangelical churches, but they are a thing. And that's the kind of church I want to see more of. And when you are a part of that church, a church like that, or a community like that, you can see that this, not only can we be so much better Christians and so much better people when we allow ourselves to be led by trans people, but also realize that trans people reveal a part of God that we can't know or experience unless it's through trans people. That's how we come to know that part of God. It's through our relationship with trans people. Because we're all made in the image of God. You know, Genesis 1. Shout out. And so each of us reveal parts of God. And so trans people reveal the trans part of God. Queer people reveal the queer part of God. God is so much bigger and better and more beautiful than a boring, straight, cisgender dude. That's a part of God, but just a small part. Oh, it's interesting. Genesis 1, you talk about God. God made the earth. God made the sky. God made the land. God made the sea. As is going through the 6 days of creation. But Genesis 1 is a poem, not a science textbook or a history book. It's a poem that's trying to send the message of what God is like. Creative and life-giving, and sees all creation as good. And then on the 6th day, God created male and female, it says, toward the end of the poem. But the reality is, It doesn't list everything that was ever created. It lists categories. So yeah, God created land and sea, but also God created marshes. Also, God created night and day, but also there's dusk and dawn. I read this in a book called Transforming: The Bible and the Lives of Transgender Christians by a trans man named Austin Hartke. And in this part, it was from M. Kaiser, who I know and I've worked with. And they were talking about there's a spectrum here. This isn't listing everything created. God created this over here and that way over there and everything in between. So then we get to male and female. Again, that's not the only thing. There's a spectrum of creation. God created night and day and everything in between, land and sea and everything in between, male and female and everything in between, and everything beyond. It's all part of it. It's all in the image of God. It can be so simple. We get all worked up and have to make our theology so complicated when we exclude trans people. Trust me. It seems like the progressive Christians or the leftist Christians, it seems like they're the ones that make things complicated, because you listen to them talk, people like me listen to me talk, and we get all into this like historical context and Greek and Hebrew and just all this like scholarship and research and different perspectives and the history of these terms or this belief or this theological doctrine and how it came into be. And it can get exhausting. And it's like, it seems like, is this person telling the truth, or should I listen to just the guy who says, I just do what the Bible says, and then he spits out some conservative belief? It seems like that guy might sound more trustworthy than the person yapping about scholarship and history and different words and the Genesis 1 is a poem and all this stuff. But the reality is, the only reason we have to get into all that is because we have to untangle the conservative interpretations of the Bible that is deeply rooted in our Western society that was built through Christian colonization. So you have all these centuries of them teaching it a certain way, and that is just baked into people's worldview, especially if you're a Christian and you grew up hearing pastors say this stuff, and they tell it to you as if it's just fact. And then you meet someone like me, who's actually, there's other interpretations, and there always has been, and it's a much bigger picture when you look at global historic Christianity and all these different branches and these different ways of interpreting it. And it feels like, oh, this guy's yapping. Maybe I shouldn't trust him. It's like, no, we just need to do a lot of work to get you to unlearn and disentangle from a very specific worldview that you were told is just reality. And so I think in general, that's what's going to need to happen with the acceptance of trans people in public life and being able to just let them live, is that it challenges people's worldview that is so deeply rooted in a particular view of gender and sex, and really deeply rooted in patriarchy and sexism. People have just been so conditioned, especially by this view that men are over women, that this idea of someone not identifying with the gender that they're assigned at birth, or perhaps even being non-binary, not identifying with either, like that just throws everything out of whack when men and women are in two different classes. and are treated differently by society and given different representation and rights and respect. It just throws the whole thing out of whack, especially in the church, especially in the churches that even more separate men and women, especially in the churches that don't even let women in ministry. The conversation in trans people is like, okay, that completely causes you to get at the root of your view of gender and the way you treat different people of different genders, and it feels like too much for people. But there's a lot of unlearning that needs to happen, a lot of disentangling that needs to happen, showing people that your worldview, your perspective of things was taught. Don't buy into these politicians and preachers and teachers and gurus and entrepreneur bros on the internet and podcasters who just say that their perspective is just objective reality. There's always more. There's always more to learn. There's always more to this big, beautiful, diverse, creative world. And so I think that's why so many people are afraid to open that door, but the door needs to be opened. We need to have these conversations. And we need to stick up for our trans friends and siblings. I really do. It's getting really dangerous right now. Everything that those people warned about when they warned about big government overreach, Big Brother 1984 dystopia, that's happening. And right now it's especially happening to trans people. And so we need to do something about it. Okay? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.